Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Welcome to Flat Earth QED. I'm your host, Nathan Oakley, and joining me today is Anthony Riley and Chris Monk. How are you both doing, gentlemen?
Good. Doing well.
Excellent. So, the topic of today is perspective view versus orthographic. And I'm going to hand straight over to Anthony, who's going to give a brief explanation for what the demonstration is, or what the purpose of the demonstration is. So take it away, Anthony.
Okay, so it appears that on the Metabunk curve calculator, it appears that when we do the distance and the observer height, we get the value for the refracted hidden that everybody applies. The problem appears to be that they apply that value against the full height of the target that you're looking at. So, for example, a mountain at 1,000 feet, when it's 30 miles away, it's not actually 1,000 feet anymore. It has an apparent size reduction due to perspective, and we should apply the refracted hidden value against the reduced height because of perspective. Now, in essence, in a really concise sentence, if we live on a plane, things appear to get smaller over distance. But if we live on a ball, things get smaller over distance, but they also drop behind the curve. And because we're applying the refracted hidden value against the full height object, which is what every single baller ever does, it means that we're not accounting for perspective. So it sounds straightforward, but a lot of people don't get it. And a lot of the ballers are arguing that it's already considered. But the difference is massive because pretty much any observation over 25 miles should put most things behind the curve. And obviously in real world, we're not seeing that. So it appears that the perspective is not being calculated for because we apply the hidden value, the refracted hidden value against the full height. And my question was, is that right? Because we know that objects do get smaller over distance. They do drop behind a curve if we live on a ball. So I asked Chris, would he be able to demonstrate the difference between the two observations? If we have a mountain or a target at a set distance away, what would it look like on a sphere? What would it look like on a ball when you flick between orthographic mode and perspective mode? And how can we discern the difference? So that was the question that I asked. Is it correct? And then hopefully Chris is going to demonstrate exactly the answer.
Let me know when you're ready in screen sharing and I'll pop you up, Chris.
All right, just let me share the screen here. 1 second. Share the screen. There we go. Should be able to see it.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, got it.
Right, so I mean, it's a really simple thing to set up. I was fortunate here and got some images from Paul on the plane where he had done he had taken a drone up to an altitude of 1,950 feet and was looking at these three mountains in the United States, Mount Adams, which has its elevation 12,280 feet, and the other two here, Mount Rainier and Mount Hood, and their respective distances to them was, they're showing here 128 miles was the furthest mountain away from the drone at the time. And so this is an orthographic view of that model setup. So essentially on the bottom, you can see that it's basically the same type of model used on the curve calculator websites. Typically, you have a line of sight and the objects with well, they don't actually show objects. That's not their issue, but they don't show objects on the curve calculators, but the hidden height would be represented by whatever's supposed to be behind this curve of the ball. So in orthographic view, you can see it's pretty simple. Straight line curve, objects in the distance to their locations, and a camera looking at them. Camera represents the observer's line of sight and the observer's altitude. Just to show you up here on the Z, the camera in this case is 1,950 feet. The ball that we're on is to scale, right? 7,916 miles, right, in diameter. And so it should be set up to scale. And when you flip from orthographic into perspective view through the camera in the top screen here, you see there's quite a change in what you see. And I'll zoom into this, the mountain in the middle here. So how this is set up is so that when you jump in the perspective view on the bottom, and see, I'll just view to that. So I can get in there a little closer so people can see it. So this orange line on the bottom represents where the camera is pointing. And it's going through basically the top of the mountain, right? And you can see that it'll pass through the mountain like so, and hit the target in the background on the picture to the pixels. So it's set up basically to hit it at the same point, and you can double check the angles and stuff that way. So it's a straight line of sight over the curved surface. So far so good, making sense. And when I rotate the camera just to sweep through the picture, you can see it maintains a line of sight relative to this blue line on the top. So this would be like a level field of view where the blue line, that's what Paul was doing in his video, was showing that this is the, would be the horizon level line. And you can see that on a curved surface, comparing this mountain to this mountain, on a curved surface, this mountain is far too low on a curved surface compared to where it appears in the picture. You can see that it's the entire height of the mountain in reality is no longer where it should be. And the same applies to the other mountain on the other side. I curve the camera and zoom back forth. So there's the one in the middle, the closest one. There's the one on the right. And it's a little closer than the one in the furthest away if we look at the numbers. Right, this one's at 123 miles versus 128 miles. And you can see when I zoom in here, it's a little closer to the target, right? There's still a discrepancy between the peak and where the mountain appears in the camera view versus the picture, right? So it's not as far off as the one to the left, the furthest one, because this one's 128 miles, right? Which shows that there's, in perspective view, is an angular reduction just simply due to perspective, right? And once you apply that to the field of view and then curve it over the ball and put it on the surface, things would be exaggerated as far as how far away or how far they drop, right? It has to be considered in the diagrams compared to just an orthographic view, right? So if I go to orthographic view in the bottom again, just to make sure we're clear, this is an orthographic view, so you see that the picture is not being warped into any sort of perspective view. And if I toggle in and out of perspective, well, this is perspective. You see the vanishing point is now over here, and it's the other way, right? So perspective makes a big difference in what you see, right? If I just look at it on the side view again to be clear. You can see the blue line of sight is where the camera, a level camera, is looking over the curve. Oops. Let's go back to that view again. Keep on the right, make sure we're there. So there's your drop between the three mountains. and I just averaged it in the view. So this is at 90 degrees. When the camera is at 90 degrees on the X, I can rotate it up and down, right? You can see that changes the target. So it's basically, I averaged it to hit the top of this mountain to be as accurate as we can. But you'll see that there's definitely a curve drop, you know, from the foreground mountain to the far field, like the near field versus far field, there's a change. And as you zoom in and out in the camera view, this is a good way to test that. If I go back to the right hand view, zoom out a bit, and zoom up. And straighten that out just a touch here on the Z. And if we zoom, this is basically at 35 millimeters, and if we zoom in and out, you can see that's what we're looking at right there. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, couple of things, Chris. You mentioned about being 90 degrees, so having a completely level transit. Can you explain why you highlighted that, please?
Oh, it's just important that, you know, when you're shooting over a curved surface or anything in a transit, if you're trying to get accurate numbers and distances, I set these models up to essentially simulate a surveyor's transit on a tripod and keep it level, so that when you spin the camera around, you know, it maintains a level line of sight.
Okay, and the reason I wanted to highlight it was because in the calculations that are performed when using the standard globe model, they would tilt the camera down in every single instance.
Yeah, I think it's that's not reality, right? They seem to tilt the camera down because it will change. Let's see if I can get it to do it here. That is 0. And 35 mil. And rotation. Right, so if your camera is up or down and you zoom in and out, right? Essentially, as you zoom in to your subject over a ball surface, right? So here's the camera. Let's see, your camera's at 90 degrees on the X. And as you zoom in, you'll notice that the water line, essentially, or the surface of the ball, it's not water in this case, but on the surface of a ball, it drops to the bottom of the picture because you're zooming over a curved surface. Right? So if I set it to 35 millimeters, you'll see that the horizon line is now almost mid-frame in the picture. And if I zoom out to 1,000 millimeter zoom, and zoom back out a bit so you can see it, right? Well, now you're not even seeing the horizon line because you're actually zoomed in above the curved surface.
Right. So that we would be able
to.
We could test that with a P900, right? We could zoom into the horizon, and it should drop away from you as you zoom in, if you got it level, right?
Correct. Yeah. But if you zoom, the reason I think they're doing it in these models, if I go back to like 100 millimeter, let's go back to 35 millimeter. And zoom in here a little bit. Now, if I tilt the camera down, say to 80, let's go down to 89 degrees approximately, 1 degree tilt on the camera, and now I zoom in and out, right? You'll see that the horizon stays in the center of the frame because I've artificially tilted the camera down, right? It's not quite I went a little too far, but it's probably half a degree or so. in that ballpark, 0.6 of a degree. There'd be a point where if you're angled at the horizon pointing down, you can get rid of that error quite well, right? You wouldn't see it in the photographic evidence by artificially inducing that tilt, which is not accurate for surveying purposes or anything else, right? It's not a level transit. So 90 degrees at 24 millimeter, and as you zoom in, the horizon line drops. How's that clear?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's really clear, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that. That's my next test.
Yeah, try it out.
Is there anything you want to add? Because I want to add 3 summary points for Chris to answer, but if you've got something you want to add, I'll get them in first, if you would.
Yeah, are you able to flip between orthographic view when you zoomed in and perspective view?
Let's see, yeah.
Because that's really the issue.
Orthographic. Yeah, orthographic takes you out of the camera view because obviously it's not, right? But orthographic, you can see that it's just a straight square view, right? It's that's what it would look like.
So back to the question on the Metabunk curve calculator. When they give us the refracted hidden value, does that mean that everybody is wrong to apply it against the target? If, in this case, let's just say the mountain was 1,000 feet, does that mean that we're wrong to apply it against the 1,000 feet mountain? Because the way I see it is 1,000 foot is different to 1,000 foot at 30 miles away. Correct?
Well, you're talking refraction versus hidden. Like refraction, it's totally different, 2 totally different things. I'd have to add, refraction into this as far as a refractive medium to simulate it and change the conditions, because refraction is relative to your densities and temperatures and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
right?
but what I mean is forgetting about the maths that goes into the value. What we apply that value against is the key point. Do we apply it against the height of the mountain, or do we apply it against the height of the mountain at 30 miles away?
Well, you'd have to do an angular size reduction of the target, a physical target like a building or a mountain at that distance first due to perspective, and then drop it on the ball model, right? So
That
the
was my
angular
point.
size, the angular size would have to be put into the equation first, and then you take it in the drop value and then calculate where you would see it appear, right?
Yeah, that's my point. So basically, what's not happening on Metabunk is he's not addressing the perspective at all. He's just giving the line, the line that you've drawn from the observer out to the mountain. But because he's not put the mountain in, if you zoom in on that one that you're playing with there, Chris.
Well, yeah, I can kind of show you what they're like. People are confusing what's hidden. They're confusing the hidden value for a physical target, right?
Yes.
It's two different things, right? So if I take the camera, I'm going to zoom out on the ball here, and I'll make this a little bit bigger just to kind of demonstrate what your point is. And I tilt the camera down approximately until you can see the line will kind of disappear on the blue ball, right?
Yeah, the bulge.
So the camera is tilted down 0.4 degrees of angular dip angle. Like I think they call it a dip angle, right? So basically, at this point here is approximately, like this isn't perfect here on the fly here, but this would represent where my little cursor is, where the angle of the line of sight is intersecting the curve on the surface at the horizon, like their projected horizon, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then they're telling you, oh, well, this is the hidden over here. At that distance, they're drawing a line from the center of the ball up on an angle here and saying that now where that line from the ball center to this now angled line of sight intersects, they're saying, okay, now this distance from here down to the surface here is your hidden value, right? There's nothing there. It's not a target or anything. So they're not applying an angular reduction to something in here in that frame. All they're saying is anything below this point to this point, you can't see it.
Yeah. Now, when we're looking at it side on like this, orthographically, there wouldn't be a size reduction because we're looking at it orthographically. But when you look at it from perspective at the top, things get smaller in the distance, and that's the bit that's not being considered because all of the evidence comes in the format from the first-person perspective. It never comes from an orthographic view. It always comes from the first-person perspective, and that's the issue.
Right.
Things get smaller and drop behind the curve, and that's not being accounted for by omission. He's not telling us that this is the thing that we need to do. We need to reduce the angular size because of perspective and then apply the hidden to it.
Yeah.
Whereas in orthographic underneath, that doesn't happen, which is the way he presents it on his website.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's just applied to the ball geometries, right? They're actually considering targets and stuff so much. Yeah.
Correct. And I think that's where his intentional mistake is. For me, it's the interpretation, it's the application of the hidden value to the target. But because it's done in first-person mode in perspective, it's never reduced in angular size because of perspective. It's applied full, and that's wrong. And this clearly shows that on the bottom image, orthographically, you put the mountain at full height. But on the top image, from the first-person perspective, it's a lot smaller. So you have to reduce that angular size. That is the whole point of it, and the maths is not considering that by omission.
Yeah, maybe I could do something here to let's see. A little quick demo on the fly here. Let's see. Yeah. Selection to cursor.
And obviously, it follows that the 1,000-mile mountain or the 1,000-foot mountain is only 1,000 feet when it's in front of your nose. Otherwise, it starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller the further away it goes.
Cursor. This is a good way to kind of get your head around that. If I can get it to on the fly here. So cursor to the selected. So our cursor's at the ball. Rotate that on the X. All right, so I'm going to rotate a mountain out there somewhere. Let me zoom out here first. I'll escape so I can take it on a longer distance. So we don't end up with too many of them. Rotate. All right, so there's one mountain. I'm going to hide the picture. So repeat. All right, so there's a mountain there. Bring it up a little closer. Put another one behind it. And repeat. A whole bunch of times. Okay, so what I did here real quickly for you is just to drive the point home. Is I took the first mountain in the front, basically repeated them in a line over the ball.
Yeah.
Right. So you can see if you had a series, a mountain range with mountains all the same relative height, and they went over the curve of a surface, what you would see in the top hand side. So if I take the camera, as an example here, and grab it.
Yeah, and what you're demonstrating right now is that in orthographic view, side on, all the mountains are the full height. It
Right.
makes perfect sense.
Right. Well, they're all the same. They're all the same height going over the curved surface away from you, dropping over the surface of a ball. It's just like, hair on the top of somebody's head or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And if I put the camera and just move it back and forth, well, then you get that parallax, right? Right. So yeah. I can angle the camera now right to left, so now you can kind of see that these mountains are all the same height, dropping. Well, that one's not included. It's the wrong spot. I'll just hide that single one. Right. So if I select all these mountains, going down that list now, right, you can see them basically appear, the blue dots will start appearing as a curved going down over the background, right?
Yeah.
In a dramatic fashion, right? So that's just a demonstration of angular reduction, right, over a curved surface in a perspective view. Right? It's quite dramatic, right?
Yeah, and the fact that you have to zoom into it in perspective view is demonstrating the fact that angular size is a thing. But obviously, it's the application of the hidden value against that perspective that's the problem, because it has to be reduced in angular size dependent on its distance. So 1,000 foot is not the same as 1,000 foot at 30 miles. But orthographically speaking, below, it is.
Yeah, if I go into a right-hand view on the bottom, right, every one of those mountains is the same size, same relative altitude, right? And I just spaced them equally over the curve, right? So you can see that this is the apparent change in the size going using perspective, right? So
yeah,
that's exactly what's going on.
And it's worth reminding people that not everybody will get this straight away. Even with this demonstration, I think there'll still be people that genuinely won't get it. But the vast majority of ballers should now understand this. And if they don't get it and they still push this narrative that it's you don't need to account for perspective, then you guys are getting something clearly wrong. You don't understand the difference between perspective and orthography. And it's that simple. Nathan.
Mountain 15. Let's see.
Just wait for Chris to just finish up what he's doing, and then I'll ask some summary questions, if that's good by Chris.
I just wanted to show you this here too. It's the same effect here. I want to. Okay, there. So target one. This should work, I think. So what I'm going to do is constrain the target of the camera to this farthest mountain in the background. And then I'm going to grab the camera and take off from the ground like you're in a helicopter, right? Let's see if that's going to constrain that view. It should here. Camera. Column line number 22. Track 2. Let's see. Mountain 22 in that target, I think. On the Z, target to Y is your up target. There, I think that'll work. Grab on the Z. There, so basically the camera now is pivoting. So it's trying to maintain that farthest mountain in the background, right?
Sure, this is how they maintain an eye-level horizon on a sphere that should fall away from you. So if you look on the bottom picture, you can see the camera as Chris raises up, angling down, which is precisely what you see on these curve calculators. They angle the curve down, and then it maintains the horizon in the top view in the center of frame. But that's not what we do. You know, as you rise up, you can maintain a level transit and still maintain an eye-level horizon. You know, notwithstanding the what's the name for that horizon that they put 2 degrees down on a altimeter, Chris?
Right.
Apparent horizon.
It's the artificial horizon or whatever, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how they get around it. So I mean, I may as well summarise my 3 points that I was going to go through on that note, actually, Chris, if that's good by you.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, this is just basically what you just said, right? So
there's really
that's falsely maintaining the center of the frame in the picture, right? It's saying that now you know where this tangent point is. So let's go ahead.
Yeah, well, that was kind of point 1, to be honest, which is why I just left you to it. So there's 3 points really in descending importance. So you've got the camera angle, which is manipulated and / what is a level transit. The zoom functionality, and does that negate the requirement to account for perspective in these calculations? And thirdly, perspective full stop, do we need to account for it when we're calculating these things? Excuse the noise.
Very concise, yes. It does need to be accounted for, yeah, in my opinion. Absolutely.
And does Zoom negate the need to do this?
Zoom? No, you still need to do it with you have to account for the change, like in the Zoom, because you're changing basically the angles within the camera optics as well, right? There's a whole lot of stuff you need to basically take into account as you zoom, right? It changes the perspective. Obviously, right? You can take a wide angle picture, right? You're changing the entire perspective of the entire scene, right? And as you zoom in, it changes. Yeah. So you need to account for it. Yeah.
So in Blender, you physically have to name the camera that you're using, and there are certain cameras that are listed, correct?
Yeah, that's for sure. If I go to the camera over here, so there's camera presets. You can pick, whatever. You can see the top picture will change slightly. That's an Nikon DX. If I can simulate an iPhone 5, right? So you see the top picture changes depending on the camera. So it calculates for those optics, right? Because it's meant to simulate reality, right? So this is like a movie production type of software and video game software that's optically accurate.
So the reason for my question was, if you were to start discussing the optics of Zoom in a response to our assertion that you must account for the angular size reduction at distance, that would be a straw man, correct?
Correct, yeah. Right, because the first person, the eyeball is the first effective perspective, right? And then the camera would be a secondary. So yeah, they'd straw man that out, right? Which is why when you tilt the camera to a particular point and maintain that target, that issue disappears essentially, right? Now when I zoom in, if I maintain that target,
yeah,
of course I got it set to a phone now, but basically it kind of remains centered in the picture. I mean, it changes. You're more or less zooming into it.
The fact that you have to zoom in the first place basically shows that perspective requires the angular size change because things get smaller. You don't have to zoom in on the bottom picture, but you do have to zoom in on the top picture to have any chance of seeing these things. That is making the angular size bigger so that you can see it. The fact that you have to zoom is the proof that you need to do the angular size reduction, otherwise these things are too small.
Yeah.
Right. So to summarise, we do not angle our cameras down. We maintain level transits when we survey things, i.e. survey the level ground we dwell atop. So therefore this fallacious idea that we would tilt our camera down is nothing more than a nonsense to make a modelled reality work where we see the horizon rise with us. That's the first point. The second point being that if you were to assert that the need to account for an angular size reduction at distance is negated by calculating out any zoom functionality is a straw man argument. And lastly, and most importantly, we absolutely unequivocally must account for perspective when comparing calculations of any model to something that is a viewing function or something that is a piece of photography, videotape, or comparing to your own eyesight. So we absolutely must account for perspective, and the curve calculations based on the standard globe model do not account for perspective and should. So therefore, based on this, every single presentation ever done where they have used these calculations to compare to a viewing function or a photograph is in essence entirely incorrect.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree.
Excellent. Anything you wanted to?
Yeah, I just like to, once again, thank you guys for having me on, and it's always fun, trying to figure these things out because I always learn something. And thanks again to Paul on the plane for letting me use his pictures and his work, because he put some effort into this with his drone and putting together the graphic in the background and so forth, so we could analyze it in the model. So team effort. So thanks again to Paul and you guys, and have a great day.
Yes, excellent. I'd echo those sentiments. So massive thanks to Paul on the plane for letting us use his images. Really, really thankful for that. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Anthony, before we round out? Maybe not.
I think it's just reminding people that I don't think that most people will understand it straight away. I don't know how else it can be demonstrated if you don't understand it at this point. I think you have to accept that maybe you're not going to grasp it ever. This is probably the clearest way of demonstrating it. And if you still don't get it, that's okay. But at least be honest to yourself, because if you don't understand that you have to zoom into these things to see them when they're in perspective mode, then be honest to yourself so that you can be honest to other people. If you don't get it, just say. If you do get it, you should be with us and saying, hey, these things do need to be reduced in angular size over distance. They are right. So at least be honest and tell us what the position is. If you don't get it, tell us. I'm done.
And with that, I'm going to say first and foremost, a huge, massive, enormous thank you to Chris Monk for modelling all of those images, and a massive thank you to Paul on the plane for supplying them. Also a big thank you to Anthony Sleeping Warrior for joining us in this discussion. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I will see you all in the next video.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!